Hi everybody, I'm Mike McCrory and this is Would You Make It? A viewer reached out to me several months ago and asked me if I could make him a checkerboard, which I did. I didn't video it because it's very similar to other chessboards I've already made, except that the squares are a little bit smaller. They're 1 7/8 inches. After receiving the board, he asked me if I could make him a set of checkers. He already had sets of checkers. One set was a little bit too big, the other set was a little bit too small for the board. So in this video, I'm going to make weighted checkers that are 1 5/8 inch in diameter, and I'm going to make them out of bloodwood and rosewood. So let's get started. I'm going to start by cutting down this piece of bloodwood, and I'm going to set aside this piece that I'm cutting off because I'm going to use it to make a box for the checkers. And now over at the lathe, I'm going to turn this down to a cylinder that's 1 5/8 inches in diameter. With the entire length the same diameter, now I can sand it down to be smooth. I'm going to apply as much of the finish as I can on the lathe because it makes it a lot easier to apply. So I'm just rubbing on a little bit of CA glue. It doesn't take very much. Multiple thin coats of thin CA glue works really well. I sanded the first coat fairly heavily, and then I did just very light sanding in between each other coat. I'm going to put a weight into the bottom of each of the checkers, and so what I'm doing now is I'm turning the plugs out of boxwood that are going to plug the boxwood pieces, and I'll do the same with the bloodwood piece as well. These plugs are going to be 1 1/4 inches in diameter, and then I'll turn the larger piece of boxwood down to 1 5/8 inches. Now both the pieces that I turned for the checkers are 18 inches long, and that's too long for my lathe to be able to drill into the bottom, so I'm cutting each piece in half. And I'll install a Forstner bit, a 1 1/4 inch Forstner bit, and I'll begin drilling into the bottom. And I'm drilling in about 7/16 of an inch. I want the checkers to be 5/8 of an inch high, so I'm cutting them a little thicker than that on the bandsaw so that I have the ability to sand them down smooth and get them to the proper dimension. Each time I go back to the lathe, I have to put a new center on the end of the boxwood. I used an awl to mark the center, and then I can insert the Forstner bit, the tip of the Forstner bit, into that hole. Bloodwood is a lot harder than boxwood, so you can see that my Forstner bit was struggling to drill into this, and the wood was starting to smoke a little bit. Forstner bit got quite hot, so I had to let it cool down after I drilled each recess. Bloodwood, maybe because it's harder, it has a greater tendency to tear out, so I taped around the outside before cutting it with the bandsaw. Now I have 2-ounce weights that I'm going to put into each checker. These are just regular sinkers for fishing, and they're a little bit thicker than I want them to be, and the diameter is not quite large enough. So I'm going to fix that by squeezing it in my vise to make it thinner and to expand the diameter a little bit. And then I'll cut each of the individual plugs on my bandsaw. I put in lots of epoxy to make sure that the lead weight was fully secured. And then I put the plug on top. And I made sure that the grain of the plug was oriented in the same direction as the grain of the checker. It's pouring rain outside right now, so it's a perfect time to be doing this. Next, I sanded them down to smooth the bottom where I had inserted the plug, and also to get it to the thickness that I wanted of 5/8 of an inch. I had to be careful with the sander to make sure that I didn't put too much pressure on one side versus another, otherwise the checker would have been sloped. The game of checkers requires 12 checkers, and I intended to make 14 for the set, but I made 16 to have a couple of extras just in case something went wrong. And I did in fact use a couple of the extras because a couple of them were not sanded perfectly. And then I'm sanding them smooth with various grits of sandpaper. I started with 180, then 220, and then 320. And now with a 1/16 inch roundover bit, I'm putting just a very subtle roundover so that the edges of the checkers will not be sharp. And this gave them a really nice feel. I had already applied finish to the circumference, and now I'm putting CA glue on the areas that I had sanded. I have this new Ortur laser, and I thought this would be a perfect opportunity for me to engrave my logo on the bottom of each of the checkers. I put these 2 strips of wood in place just to make it easy to place the checker consistently. It was my first time using the laser, and it was quite easy to figure out how to use it. And it took about 1 minute to engrave my logo into each checker. The logo did not show up as well with the darker wood, but it still looked okay. My daughter's boyfriend is back working on one of his knife handles, so it's going to be a little bit noisy in the background from this point forward. I have 32 checkers to sand, and I'm just going to sand them smooth after running it through the laser. And then I will apply another light coat of CA glue. I wanted the finish to be really smooth, so I buffed them on the buffing wheel. I didn't use any buffing paste, I just wanted to clean up any rough spots. And also the buffing paste would have become embedded in the logo that I just engraved. After buffing, I thought they were just a little bit too shiny for my client's taste. I know he likes things to have a matte finish, which is what I put on his checkerboard. So I used this Merlon pad. It's the equivalent of 1500 grit sandpaper, basically, and that was enough to provide a nice, dull, smooth finish. And that's it. I just laid them out on an unfinished checkerboard so you can see how they look. So I gotta ask, would you make it?